And so what your ear does, the sound comes in, it goes through your ear canal. This is what's called the eardrum, or your tympanic membrane. It shakes in response to these air molecules moving. Then it goes, what it does is it shakes these three little bones called the ossicles, so the smallest three bones in your body. And what they do then is they push on what's called the cochlea. And the cochlea is this little sort of conch shell looking thing filled with fluid, and it's got a membrane in there that vibrates when these bones push on it, and this membrane goes like this. And that vibrating membrane is what turns vibrations into a neural signal that your brain hears. So it actually turns it into electricity, tiny little electrical signals in your brain. And so we're going to sort of take a tour through the ear now. Okay, so we are a sound pressure wave. We have entered into the ear canal. Here's the eardrum shaking, the ossicles. So here's the cochlea.
So here we are with a view of the cochlea. The cochlea now uncoils. So we look at the basilar membrane, and now see what happens when we play
so check this out.
tones.
You see a low tone first, and then medium tone, then a high tone. They're excited at different places on the cochlea.
And finally, something really complex.
Shaking this part of the cochlea, low frequencies shaking this part. And sort of the extent we can hear, we can do 20 vibrations per second on this side, and about 20,000 on this side, if you're a baby. When you are no longer a baby, which I think most of us are not, you lose that on the top. It gets lower and lower, the highest frequencies you can actually hear. People in this room, probably between 15,000 vibrations and maybe 18,000 on the high end if you've been really good to your ears. Okay, so some sounds can be removed more noticeably or less noticeably than others. And the whole gist of what we're going to do is take away the less noticeable ones. So the way you know which ones are less noticeable is by using a perceptual model. And that's kind of a nice buzzword, which is why I italicized it. I'm going to give you an example of a different perceptual model. So let's say you're my roommate, and you haven't been to the grocery store in a while, you're hungry, you're thirsty, but you don't need food. So you open the fridge, and you see that I just went to the grocery store, I've got some milk, I've got some beer, I've got lots of good stuff, right? So your job is to, based on the fact that you know me, and you know what I'll notice and what I won't notice, take my food, okay? So if you take a glass of milk, I'm not going to notice, right? You got a whole gallon, it's going to go down like that much. I probably won't notice that. If you take half a beer, I'm going to notice, because then I've got a half full beer in the fridge. You can go, maybe I notice when you take things from the freezer, less than when you take something from the vegetable crisper, right? Something like that. So really simple stuff like that. But you know me, you know what I'll notice and you know what I won't. And you're going to take as much food as you can, so a little bit here, a little bit there, so that I won't notice. That's based on your perceptual model of me, of what I'll perceive. And so what MP3 does is it takes principles about what we will notice and what we won't, and it throws stuff out based on that. So in general, we are just more sensitive to some frequencies than others. So I'll play, what this is going to do is it's going to play from the lowest frequencies we can supposedly hear up to the highest. And you'll notice that it seems like it's getting louder at some points. It's actually not. It's actually because you are more sensitive to some frequencies. Those frequencies are actually the ones that are involved in speech, because speech is very important to us as speaking humans. So now it's gone, but it could still be playing for all we know, because we can't hear that high. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play a few frequencies. I apologize, these might be a little annoying, but you know, it's worth knowing how bad your hearing is, right? So here's a 5 kilohertz signal. Hopefully we can all hear this one. So that's right in the speech range I was talking about. All right, here's 10 kilohertz. Can anybody not hear that one? Okay. It'd be sad if someone found out they were deaf here. Here's 15 kilohertz, if I can grab it. Could anyone not hear that one? Really? That's great. You guys have great hearing. Okay, here's 18 kilohertz. How about that one? So there was a little sort of, and there, that's not the sound, that's an artifact, but there's this really, really high pitch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll play it.
It's a good ringtone.
Really, really high.
Yeah.
You heard it? Nice. You guys must wear earplugs when you go to concerts. Tisk, tisk, tisk. And then here, just to see if we have any babies in the audience we can make cry, here's 20 kilohertz.
I actually heard that.
I heard
No
that.
kidding.
I heard that.
I must be, you know, in the wrong place.
I heard that.
Cool. Awesome. Well, I'm giving this talk to the right audience, because you guys would really hate MP3s then if you could hear this well. But still, you have to admit, even though you can hear it, 5 kilohertz was a whole lot more noticeable than 20 kilohertz, right? And so MP3 knows this, and it's going to give more weight to the 5 kilohertz stuff than it is the really high stuff, because we just don't, we aren't as sensitive to this, even if we can hear it. So that's sort of the gross, you know, well, I can take from the freezer rather than the fridge, you know, that's where you're going. There's also some more complicated stuff, which is that some frequencies can mask other frequencies. And so what I mean by that is think of the model of the cochlea we had vibrating, right? So if you play a noise that's between, say, 500 hertz and 2000 hertz, and it'll make a certain range of the cochlea vibrate. And then if you play a tone just outside that range, you won't hear it because the vibration is sort of spilling over into that tone. So I'll play you an example of what that would mean. So here's a tone. And here's some noise. And here's both together. Now I promise the tone was in there. Could anyone hear it? Okay. Because if anyone raised their hand, I was going to make them close their eyes and do an actual test. That's part of psychoacoustics, is you have to test people's ability. But so you guys are honest. I couldn't hear it either. I made it so I couldn't hear it. But I promise you, the tone was in there at exactly the same level as in the first signal. So that's kind of cool, right? MP3 knows this. It knows that it can do that. And so what does it do with the tone? It kind of throws it away. It doesn't actually throw it away. I'll show you, but show you a little later. But you can think of it as throwing it away because we can't hear it. So you can also do things in time. So when we were talking about frequency masking, you can also, if a quiet sound comes just before or just after a louder sound, it's really hard to hear. Okay, so the whole idea of how this works is you take your uncompressed sound, you put it into the perceptual model we just talked about. So you break it into little chunks in time and frequency. Say, this matters, this doesn't, this matters, this doesn't, and then you throw out what doesn't matter. And then just to squeeze every last bit out of it, you go through a lossless compressor. And then you have your MP3. So it's actually using both lossy and lossless compression to make the file smaller. So I said throw away. I said it's not really throw away. So what it actually does, if you remember, we've turned up. So I'm going to turn down a little bit so I don't totally blast you. What this one sounded like. So that sounds awful, right? Remember? But what it's doing is it's choosing the places where it can do that to the sound at a very sort of local level. And in the places where you won't notice, it does that even more than you heard. It'll really, really squeeze it out. And in places that really matter, it doesn't do it as much. And you can kind of see that in the image too. Like if you look here, this background looks horrible, right? Like we have this nice sort of smooth thing. Well, look at the wings. The wings really don't look that bad. And so there are places in this image where it matters a lot more than others, and sound is just the same. Okay, so a note on bitrate. If you've sort of delved a little bit into MP3s, you'll see that they have different bit rates. And so computer files are made up of ones and zeros. The more ones and zeros that make up a file, the bigger the file is, and big is bad when it comes to files. So audio is measured in kilobits per second. So, you know, a long file should be twice as big as a short file, right? So we measure it by the second. And CD audio in its uncompressed form is 1,411 kilobits per second. So about 1.4 million bits per second. If you do a lossless FLAC file, so this is still compressed, it's about half the size, but this, you lose absolutely no information. You can get the original signal back perfectly. If you do MP3, remember the sky's the limit. So I'm going to play between 32 and, well, 256 actually, but 320 is what you download on Amazon. And the most common, what iTunes did for a long time, and they may still do actually, I don't know, is 128 kilobits per second. So that's about 12 times smaller than the original file, and about 6 times smaller than that. And a note, so if you have a FLAC file, it is CD quality, but if you ever see CD quality MP3s, you have my permission to slap the person that said that, because it's not. It's not CD quality. It has had information removed. And the more sensitive among us can hear that. And hopefully by the end of the night, all of us will be able to hear that. And just to give you an idea of what these different bit rates sound like, here's 32 kilobits per second. So this is the most compressed.
Ooh, baby,
so that's not too nice. 64 is the one I played before.
ooh, baby,
Better, but if you compare it to the lossless,
ooh, baby,
it's nice. It sort of opens up on the high end. I see the faces that you can't hear. I told you, that's okay. We've got training materials out for you. So. The trick, if you really want to ruin MP3s for yourself, is to listen to the more compressed ones, and you'll recognize the way in which it messes up the sound. And then the less compressed one, mess it up in the same way, just not as much. So you can sort of train your ear what's wrong with an MP3, and then you'll hear it even when you wish you couldn't. So, I've given lots of this, you know, that kind of thing tonight. So, 3 more. So, MP3s, they make files a lot smaller. But we now have huge hard drives, so who really cares? They also make files very quick to download, but we now have really, really fast internet. So, you know, what's the difference between downloading an album in 30 seconds and 90 seconds? When the album you're going to listen to, and you can download it faster than you can listen to it anyway, right? It reduces the quality of the music, bad, but it's pretty darn good considering how much you're squeezing out, right? And 12 times smaller, and it still sounds pretty good. So, just not great. And because it's not great, and music should always be great, my moralizing message to you is use lossless compression. It sounds perfect. If you want it to be a different format, you can switch to that format. You don't lose anything. Sometimes small files are totally necessary. If you've got 32 megabytes of storage on some little device or something and you need it to be on there, then you have my permission. But don't do it if you don't need to. And that's all I've got. I'm happy to take questions.